Support comes from Sunday Morning Cafe, presenting Resilience and Creativity, a concert and interview with Royce Martin, creator of Swag Time, and resilience researcher Dr. Tom Wagner on August 2nd, sundaymorningcafe.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. In 2025, the Missouri History Museum debuted Mill Creek, Black Metropolis, an exhibition that presents the history and people's lived experiences of Mill Creek Valley, a predominantly Black neighborhood that was raised to make way for Interstate 64 in the 1960s. That destruction disrupted a thriving community of nearly 20,000 people. And that story was nearly forgotten until former residents, who were children at the time of that urban renewal project, began putting their history on paper. Last year, just before the opening of Mill Creek, Black Metropolis, I spoke with Vivian Gibson, the memoirist of The Last Children of Mill Creek, and Malaika Horne Wells, the author of the 2018 book Mother Wit. Both guests grew up in Mill Creek Valley. Their books brought about greater awareness of their childhood neighborhood. The two women also supported the curation of the Missouri History Museum exhibit, which is set to close this Sunday, July 12th. I started our conversation by asking Malaika to set the scene for what she remembers most vividly about living in Mill Creek Valley as a child.
By the time I moved, we were about the only house on the block because they had torn down everything around us. And as I've been saying recently, my older brother, who has a memory like no other, because I don't have a really good memory, said he could look from our house all the way down to Venner. And we were at, if you can imagine, Market and Garrison, near Hairstow. So, but during the time that it was thriving and bustling, it was a really cohesive, very hustle bustle kind of community.
Is there maybe a scene that stands out in your mind?
Crossing Market.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
Because we went to Johnson Elementary. I do not remember a crossing guard, but I do remember my mother saying every day, "Watch the cars," because my aunt got hit and killed trying to cross that street. Back then, Market was like Skinker during rush hour.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Okay. And Vivian, how about for you? What do you remember? What is a scene that you recall of growing up in Mill Creek Valley?
Well, certainly Market Street was a demarcation. It was like across Market Street was like going out of the neighborhood. And when you're a child, your block is your neighborhood. So Malaika probably lived maybe 3 blocks away, but that was very far. You lived and played in your block with your friends on your block. We had our own confectionaries. Just about every other corner was a confectionery. As a matter of fact, sometimes when I talk to people today, they talk about, Mr. Scott was my confectionery, or Mr. Cotton was my confectionery. So it was all very, very kind of compact. And there were people walking. It was a walking community. So children played in the street, in the alleys. We didn't have parks. So you played on maybe the school playground when school was closed, but basically you played in front of your house, your backyard, your alley, or your street. So it was compact. The houses were very close together, many of them touching, kind of row housing. So it was just very vibrant.
Yeah. Well, no matter where you were, I imagine that your mothers had some sense of where you were in the neighborhood, and you've both written about your mothers and the different ways that they lived and mothered you in Mill Creek. Malaika, what about your mother brings up memories of the neighborhood in which you grew up?
Well, she was a stay-at-home mom, as they say nowadays. And we couldn't rip and run like we were jealous of the children who could rip and run up and down the street. We had to sit on the front porch. So we had to come up with games about the year of a car or the name of the car. We had to play all kind of games while sitting on the front. Now, we did have a backyard. And in the backyard, we had an above-ground swimming pool. We had a merry-go-round. We had 2 sets of swings. So a lot of times when I say I was raised poor, well, how were you raised poor when you had all of that? But we were. My parents were very resourceful. That's the only way I can explain it.
And before we move from what you remember, how did your mother and your family move to Mill Creek Valley?
They, like so many other African Americans, came to St. Louis from the South. They were from. My mother was from Starkville, Mississippi. My father was from Columbus, Mississippi, was sort of like a university town, Mississippi State. And they didn't know each other there in Mississippi, but they met in the 30s and got married and bought a house at 328 South Garrison.
328. Vivian, how about for you, your mother, and how it relates to Mill Creek Valley?
Yeah, well, let me say, we had a swing too, but it was a rope tied around an old tire that my brother slung over a tree limb. So we had a swing. Okay. But my mother was an artist, a craftsperson, and so that was how she contributed to the family income. She crocheted, she did quilting, she sewed, she was a milliner, she made ladies' hats, and she was also a stay-at-home mother, but she worked very hard. 10 of us lived in 3 rooms. I don't mean 3 bedrooms. I mean 3 rooms. So we were very, very close. And in the summer, it was like, get up, get your breakfast, do your chores, and get out of the house. And so we were out in the yard, out on the street playing all day. And my mother still knew where we were, what we were doing, because she was there at the window. And there were times when you had to play in front of the house so that she could see you through the window.
One of the things I think that can be hard for people to wrap their heads around is when there's a discussion of history and even a neighborhood, that there's a temptation to think of everyone being the same. And what you've shared about your mothers, clearly there were some differences. What other kinds of differences existed within the Mill Creek Valley neighborhood that maybe are not adequately acknowledged? Malaika?
Well, first I want to say that it was very crowded because of segregation. There were only a few places, communities we could live. But it was multi-class, I would say, even though it was mainly working class. You had doctors and lawyers and other professionals. You had, even though a lot of the big factories, mainly white people worked in those big factories. But in terms of smaller businesses, then you had a vibrant business community of small businesses. And then you had these gig workers, as we would say nowadays. You had the snowball man, you had the skin man, you had the watermelon man, you had the coal man, all man. And they would go up and down the street. That's why it made it so much more interesting and exciting to live there, because you saw how entrepreneurial these people were trying to make a living, even though there was job discrimination. So that was one part of it.
Yeah, there was even the junk man in the
junk
alley.
Man, there was all kind of
because
selling,
people
selling.
put their trash and their garbage in the yard in the alley, and they weren't picked up regularly, and so there was a whole career out of picking through what people had thrown away.
Now, we are talking largely because there is this new museum exhibit opening this weekend at the Missouri History Museum. It's titled Black Metropolis. Both of you have visited the exhibit. How much of what we have talked about so far shows up in what you've seen, Vivian?
I think it shows up pretty well. I think Gwen Moore, the curator of this exhibit, who is Malaika's sister, and so she also was born in Mill Creek, so she had a real personal connection to this exhibit, and a lot of what we talk about shows up. I even learned a lot, and it's very comprehensive, I feel. So I think you'll have a good sense of what Mill Creek was like when you finish this exhibit and how diverse it was. I like to think of it as a diverse community. Your teacher could have also gone to your church, could have been in a club with your mother. Clubs were very, very big in the Black community in those days. A lot of things that we didn't have access to, we put together in this community ourselves, the schools, the churches. There were 43 churches in Mill Creek, and 42 of them were demolished.
That is a breathtaking fact. I mean, the number is one thing, but what was lost in those churches being destroyed. Did it feel in any way like a return to your childhood home, Malaika, seeing the exhibit so far?
Well, I have been a volunteer at the working on this project for the last 2 or 3 years since I retired. So, and my job was to do the research on the schools, the churches, and I did. My idea was to do Vashon notables because I hope I'm being fair here, but the view is that people who graduated from Vashon, as I said recently, were a bunch of losers, and they weren't. We had a lot of winners, and so it's not exhaustive, but I have come up with scores of people who've done fantastic. Elston Howard, for example, who broke the color barrier for the New York Yankees. Norman Say, Maxine Waters. In fact, I began to Percy Green, Bobby Wood. I said, well, there was a lot of activists who came out of Mill Creek. And then, as Gwen has noted in her exhibit, it was a hotbed of activism. When civil rights workers came here from all over the country to meet, they met at the People's Finance Building. She can say this much better than me. It was the building, a building for businesses that was built with all Black money. And according to the Globe Democrat, it was the first building built with all Black money in the world. And she said she couldn't cross-check that, but that's what was noted in the Globe Democrat.
And those Vashon notables include musicians Clark Terry and Donny Hathaway, right?
Terry and Donny Clark Terry was the musician who played on the first Black musician to play on the Johnny Carson show. But what I found out, it was because of pressure from the Urban League that got him that position. Wow. So, yes, and Donny Hathaway, who's much more contemporary for us, he's deceased. In fact, both of them are deceased. He was a singer with Roberta Flack. He had big hits a couple of decades ago.
These are some big names. And I hadn't realized that Maxine Waters also grew up in Mill Creek Valley. I moved here from Los Angeles, and so that name is
She moved to Los
familiar.
Angeles from St. Louis.
Yeah.
Oh, did I say that Vivian Gibson graduated from Vashon High School?
Yeah.
But I present there.
It was later.
But she was younger.
Sure.
There are 3 iterations
Right.
of Vashon High School. It's the original, the second, which is where I attended, and now there's a third.
Okay.
And let me say, I admire Vivian for that, because a lot of students back then wouldn't want to go to Vashon. But she saw that they had a great program for designers. And she went there, and then she ended up going to New York.
Yeah.
She was in Vogue magazine. So you should.
Thank you, Malaika.
Winners all around.
Yeah. So you can't just go by a stereotype. And that's one of the
Yes.
things that we want to do with the exhibit, is to dismantle these stereotypes and caricatures that have hurt a whole community.
That was Malaika Horne Wells and Vivian Gibson, authors and oral historians who grew up in Mill Creek Valley and contributed to the Missouri History Museum's exhibit, Mill Creek, Black Metropolis. That exhibit closes this Sunday, July 12th. After a quick break, we'll continue this encore presentation of our conversation with Gibson and Horne Wells last year before the exhibit's opening. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio.
Support comes from Gemma, architects, planners, and designers seeking to bring joy to their clients and communities. Details at gemastl.com.
Welcome back. I'm Elaine Cha. Let's return to my conversation with Malaika Horne Wells and Vivian Gibson, authors and oral historians who grew up in Mill Creek Valley and contributed to the Missouri History Museum's exhibit, Mill Creek, Black Metropolis. We spoke last year, just before the exhibit's opening. Mill Creek, Black Metropolis closes this Sunday, July 12th. Here I ask Malaika about challenges in helping curate the exhibit, including a lack of physical artifacts.
There was very little collections, even at the Missouri History Museum. Now we do have the African American History Initiative, I think it's called, that's promoting and encouraging people to African Americans and others to contribute. But it was a heavy lift because back then, even in the newspapers, they didn't cover black people at all. In fact, Gwen Moore says they didn't even cover black crime. So, it was a very difficult kind of project. But with oral histories and with the excellent work of Gwen Moore and her assistant Mark Lohr and myself, we were able to put together, I think, a really credible presentation of that community.
Mm-hmm. Vivian, your latest project is not a book. Mm-hmm. It is a documentary. Mm-hmm. Talk with us about remembering Mill Creek when we were there.
Well, I wrote the book, and it's about my life, my family, my neighborhood, but I knew there were more stories. And I am well beyond 75, and I knew that at some point there were people even older than I that we needed to get these stories documented. So I set out to find former residents and interview them and do this documentary. So we had stories. I was probably 10 or 11 when we moved from Mill Creek, but there were people who had their entire childhood years in Mill Creek who were older than me, who had a different perspective on what life was like. They went on to college, went on to the military, and so I wanted those stories. So I got a message from a young film director who told me that he was the son of Melvin Butch Lattimore that he had read about in my book. Mm. And at the end of a charming conversation with him, he said, "Oh, by the way, I'm a film director, a filmmaker. If I can help you, let me know." And that's how it got started. Mm-hmm. So I found 18 former residents, and we interviewed them about their experience living in Mill Creek, and importantly, what it was like to watch it disappear. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we're doing. So we have a 21-minute documentary, another 15 hours or more of video. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so who knows where it's going to go from here.
So obviously then the film has not been released, but you did share a portion of it with us. Here are some of the voices of the former residents who remember Mill Creek Valley as home.
You could be rich in this neighborhood, or school teachers in this neighborhood, there were factory workers in this neighborhood, but it supported each other. It was our own society.
Everybody took care of everybody else. We paid attention, we loved each other.
Well, we cared for one another, for one thing. If grandmother got extra food, she would share it with her neighbors. If they got extra things, they shared. They looked out for each other. If you strayed from a block away, somebody was calling, telling them that you were not in the area where you should be. We were a protected community. Everybody looked out for people. I don't remember the violence or things like that. I'm sure we had problems, but I don't remember it being as plentiful as it is today.
Vivian, you've been working on this film, so this is not unfamiliar, but in this situation we're right now, in this context, what stands out to you about what we just heard?
Joy. That surprised me even, and I think it surprises a lot of people that we lived in this segregated community. We were very restricted to where we could go, where we could live, but somehow the adults in this community protected us. Many of them came from the deep South where they had grown up in poverty and segregation and hatred, but they protected us. And so we had this protected, joyful childhood and community. We went to school, we went to church, and we felt safe. I can't tell you how many people said we felt safe. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes across when you see this documentary.
Yeah. You've just mentioned joy. Is joy reflected in the exhibit, Malaika?
I believe so. I went through it fairly quickly the other day because it's not opening until the 15th. But I also wanted to say that, like Vivian's documentary, what we want to do is focus on the people. The reason why we don't have Mill Creek because they focus too much on, or almost exclusively, on the buildings. And so if you think about a group of people who made lemonade out of lemons, and this is based on a theory of W.B. Du Bois that talks about segregation versus congregation. We're in this situation, let's make the most out of it, and that's what happened. But I just want to say this one last thing. I think that this is divine providence. To have Vivian Gibson do a book and a documentary, Gwen Moore doing an exhibit. Then I always talk about Lois Conley, who is head of the Griot Museum, and myself, all growing up around the same time. And now here we are, maybe 60 years later, talking about it here at your outstanding radio station. I have to say it's much more than just what's happening on the ground. It's something going on. It's divine providence.
And it's not the men. It's not the snowman. It's not the...
Yeah, it changed, didn't it?
It's a group of women.
It
right?
changed, didn't it?
With the oral histories that you all have been able to gather, was there anything about, identifying people who are willing to talk with you that was a challenge?
Men.
Oh, boy.
When I sought people to interview for this, men said no, hands down, a lot of them, and I panicked. I had one man, and then he called 2 days before and canceled. So I got on Facebook, and I said, I need men. Call your husbands, your brothers, your fathers, and ask them to talk to me. And sooner or later, one or two came, and even that one came back. So I was able to have a good balance of men. I started getting more recommendations.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you think that there's room for more with the film that people, the special screening that people are going to see on Saturday?
Yeah, I think there's more. As I said, we had a lot of footage that we did. And I want to mention the young man who is the director. His name is Khalid Abdul Qadir. And he was very just passionate about this project. His father was my brother's best friend, and I wrote about him in the book. And when he called me that day, he said, I'm walking around campus looking for the places you wrote about in this book, and they're not here. And so I really hope, and he's an interesting young man, so I hope we'll hear more from him as well.
What is missing is one thing. What do we have that is really important, Malaika?
Well, I would think connections, and here's a little story. Dr. Corman Charleston, who was on our advisory council, she was in the same class with my brother, who is a retired federal judge. And he used to complain about her because she got her cookies and milk first. But he's still saying that. But when we were at a meeting recently, and the researcher, Mark, had found a photo, and Gwen of these Johnson students, and she was on it in her majorette outfit because we had a drum and bugle corps at Johnson to show that, impeccably dressed. She was shocked to see a photo that she hadn't seen before. So I think connections. I think the documentary does it. I think the exhibit does it. The books do it. But one last thing, though. Before this, very few people had heard of Mill Creek. Mill Creek, Gwen did 10 years of research or more, and then Vivian's book, which brought it to light.
Missouri History Museum is, an official, authorized keeper of our history locally. You don't need an official institution to validate the history that you've just been talking with us about. But what does it mean to have this exhibition in November of 2025 opening?
Well, it's important, but to dovetail off of what Malaika said about connections, I'm excited because we're connecting to other generations, to new generations. We have this young man who's the director of the documentary, but I talk to students all the time. John Burroughs School, for the last 4 years, all of their 7th graders have read my book over a 3-week period, and they do projects, and they really understand what the book is all about. And they have the best questions when I sit down with them at the end of the 3 weeks. And I think it's just important for this new generations of people and community to know that we were there.
That was Vivian Gibson and Malaika Horne Wells, authors and oral historians who grew up in Mill Creek Valley and contributed to the Missouri History Museum's exhibit, Mill Creek, Black Metropolis. We spoke last year, just before the exhibit's opening. Mill Creek, Black Metropolis closes this Sunday, July 12th.
This episode was produced by Danny Wissentowski.
Audio editing by Maya Norfleet.
Audio engineering and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
Our executive producer is Alex Hoyer.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations, and leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thank you.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Hi, I'm Laura Hamden, and my colleague Jessica Rogan and I are your daily hosts of the Gateway newsletter. We meet with the editors in the STLPR newsroom every weekday to bring you the top local stories of the day in a quick and easy 6-minute read by 6 a.m. In an age of overwhelm, it's a refreshing, thoughtful take on the news day, if we do say so ourselves. Fine-tune your daily news habit with the Gateway newsletter. Subscribe at stlpr.org/gateway.